What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the RoboTaxi Report. I am so excited to bring this report to you today because my reports have gone through a bit of a makeover here thanks to the guy behind what you're seeing right now on screen. So this is the FSD Beta Community Tracker that's been out for quite a while now. The genius behind this is Elias Martinez. He's very active on Twitter, putting out updates and bringing in a lot of people. I mean, just even here you can see 151 testers contributing to this data all over the US and Canada that highlights everything going on with the beta. And sure, it's not from Tesla, it's crowdsourced, and people have expressed there could be errors here or there, but the work is fantastic. And in my opinion, from working with Elias for over the last year plus on this data side of things, I put a lot of stock into what he does. We are very similar in being objective and diligent and having integrity in the data and really trying to show what's actually going on objectively without hyperbolic praise nor hyperbolic criticism where it isn't warranted. This is our attempt to make this as objective and reliable as possible. And I bring this up and want to show you guys this community tracker, which anybody who has FSD Beta can join. Just got to get in touch with Elias. His information will be in the description, and it always is with these reports. But he's cooked up something pretty amazing that's transformed what I do in a big way. So without any further ado, let's get into today's RoboTaxi report. We're going to kick this off like I normally do with the RoboTaxi results. And this is showing everything. We've managed to take all of my data from the ridiculous journals and everything I've had, Excel spreadsheets and all, and put it in a presentation that is a lot more refined and pretty easy to follow along with. So the information you're seeing here on screen is counting everything that I've done all the way back to 10.8.1 when I started actually measuring specific RoboTaxi results. And what I mean by that is for all of these trips, I am very strictly from pickup to drop off measuring how well the system performs. These aren't all the trips I do in aggregate because I drive on my own as well, but these are all of the officially strict rated RoboTaxi trips where I'm criticizing it as if it's a paid service. Keeping that in mind, the system isn't really meant to be used that way yet. And even so, I think the results, if anything, show an amazing proof of concept. I mean, following along on the screen here, you can see these numbers at the top of the bar graphs. These are the quantity, the number of trips I've actually done. So 328 trips on 10.8.1, 77 on 10.10. And, you can follow along here, 136, 303, 53, and most recently on 11.3.6, I've done a total of 78 trips as of this video. Now, the yellow bar you're seeing should be pretty intuitive. This is the actual trip success, which we can highlight, and you can actually see that out of the 328 trips on 10.8.1, it was 50%. And then it dropped pretty heavily down to 26%. And then 10.11, my pride and joy there, 61% overall. And then going forward, we can actually focus in on 11.3.4 and 11.3.6. Now, don't be too alarmed by this yellow bar dropping down that much. I mean, if you bring in other graphs, you can see that perspective is important here when it comes to looking at this overall. So the fact that it's that steep, try not to let that mess with you too much. It's important to realize the numbers. So I guess we'll keep 10.69 here being, the last version 10 recent patches that did not do very well, over 300 trips at 25%. It'll help show the way version 11 quickly corrected a lot of that, especially thinking about how good 10.11.2 was at 61. Now, initially, 11.3.4 struggled when it was first teething, but over 53 trips, we saw that it had a really good performance rating at 58%, which is getting up to the highs that the system's experienced. The best being 61, again, with 10.11. Now, 11.3.6 initially was very promising in that same regard. Some of the trips were getting up, or some of the days, I should say, were getting up to 67, 68%. But of course, with any sample size, as you get more information, you iron out the outliers and you get a better idea of what's actually going on. And that is exactly what happened as we've hit 78 trips, which is a lot more than I expected I would get on this version so far. I don't have 11.4 yet, so I'm still gaining data on 3.6, which is good for a robust size. It's allowed it to iron out the kinks and show that it's got a pretty consistent success rate around the 55 percentile. And as you'll see later, in a very exciting new addition to the RoboTaxi report, there are certain areas that are just very, very difficult, and other regions where it kills it most of the time. And as those balance out, you see the overall performance. So keeping in mind those parameters, this is a cumulative or an aggregate total of performance across all areas that I drive. It might make sense at a later date to actually parse out the regions and show yeah, you could definitely have robotaxis in this area, or at least start a beta program of a robotaxi service and see how it does, whereas other areas are definitely not yet or no-go zone. But again, I don't want to spoil too much. We'll get into that portion of the RoboTaxi report after we're done with this and our lovely Causation Donut. Now, before we move on, I do think it's really important to remember that these robotaxi trips, if I have to intervene in any way that would require me to be in the seat to do so, then it's a fail. So to be clear, as in every video you see, I am in the seat ready to take over at all times. I am fully in control and keeping everybody safe. But my point is that if we come to a situation where we're going to miss a turn and have to reroute aggressively, or if the system even just gets excessively uncomfortable and jerky or really heavy braking, anything that would cause a customer thinking ahead as a paid service to not want to come back or to give it a really bad review or to report it to NHTSA or whatever, moments like that where I got to take over or get involved, classify the entire trip as a fail. That's why I bring up that these robotaxi results are much stricter than the average tester is looking for when they're doing the FSD beta drives and videos and such. Because you'll see certain individuals that are very adamant about how good it's gotten, and I don't want to take away from that. It has gotten really good at so many things. But this is a metric beyond a lot of those standards, looking at it again as a paid service. It's really important to hone in on that and to not get too dissuaded by seeing it still down in the mid to high 50% as far as completions. What this should do, what you should glean from this graph on its own, is that this will work. Robotaxis are not only possible, but have a pretty decent efficacy even as of now. That might not be the best term to use for that, but I'm excited, so hopefully you can forgive me. Now, moving forward with this amazing work, we're going to look at the Causation Donut, new and improved. Now, the one you're looking at right now on the screen, this is taking into account everything from 11.3.6 all the way back to 10.2 to 10.8, all the data that I've gathered around causation. And I think it'd be really cool actually to look at this in a cumulative stance real quick before we jump into version 11. So even here, looking at all the data over time, the 70+ thousand kilometers I've driven, the biggest problem, over 521 disengagements, were all related to route staging or route accuracy, or execution around accuracy. These are those moments where the vehicle is getting into the wrong lane before a turn, or doesn't act in a quick enough way to stage itself to get onto a highway. Anything that would cause you to basically miss your route and go through a series of rerouting scenarios. Again, from the mindset of a paid robotaxi service. My data presentation here is mostly focused on that, on this being a robotaxi service. And I've already surveyed several customers that really rate the importance of accuracy on the route up there. It sort of depends on whether or not you're having a trip just to go to a friend's place, or if you're trying to get to an appointment or the airport or to work. Most people highly rate the importance of it getting it right and not wasting time by rerouting. And that's why I'm highlighting this so consistently and with so much fervor, because route staging is going to be necessary for this to be something that people use reliably and come back to and keep paying for. That being said, to the credit of the FSD team, for this to be the biggest concern, I think is still a win. I mean, as you can see right here next to the staging portion of this, we have this little 4.69% bracket, which is safety-related disengagements. And this is, again, cumulative. This is over like a year and a half's worth of data. And in all that time, in all the driving I've done, in aggregate, the safety-related disengagements are not even 5%. Even less so than that, looking over here, we've got 2.48% being legal concern. I hope that this makes it clear that there's a lot to celebrate here, that the majority of concerns are non-safety or legal-related issues. And looking at the other areas of the Causation Donut, you know, we have the system error, which is the red wheel that pops up and forces you to take over. You really don't have a choice in that sense. And that's down below 3%, which is good. Hopefully that goes closer and closer to zero. Right next to that, we have system limitations, which has always included things like U-turns or extreme heavy weather or like no right on reds, things, skill sets, I should say, that the system doesn't have incorporated. So it's not exactly sensible to judge it too harshly in comparison to the other issues, because it doesn't even have the ability to execute these things properly. Once it does, it can be put into a different category. And then getting into discomfort, this is actually a lot lower than some might expect. Just over 6% of disengagements, from probably excessive braking being the minor of the concern. More often than not, it's really jerky steering motions where, for me, the Yoke will just sort of jolt really quickly and send the whole car kind of lurching and make the customer look up and go, whoa, what was that? And that can be a disqualifying factor for a robotaxi trip if it's severe enough, or if it does it more than like twice. because I don't want the customer to start to think like, what is going on? Where the level of competence seems to fall the more jerky it behaves. And it's quite a small issue. Now, the false positives are definitely lower than they would normally be because this really became a focus with version 11. Same with roundabouts down here at 0.18%. So let's go ahead and look at version 11 together, both 11.3.4 and 11.3.6. And with this, you can see the majority, almost 40%, is still staging. And coming around here, we've got, over 5% being system error, which isn't fun. 5 total disengagements with the red wheel, which is really annoying. And in all of them, it's really hard to pick out what might have caused that. And system limitations really low. Only 3 disengagements, or about 3%. Discomfort, also really low, below 10%, 7. And then false positives mostly being around the Gauntlet and Gauntlet 2.0, which I can't wait to hit again with 11.4, hopefully soon. And human here being anything that involves a non-safety critical disengagement around pedestrian, cyclist, human drivers, where it's just an awkward situation that I have to take over. And these are a good chunk of the data, and that'll go down, I think, in time as more autonomy comes in, then the human side comes out of it. But given it performs so well around unpredictable human drivers and pedestrians and such, I'm pretty proud of it. I actually get a lot of customers that think that this won't really be a thing until everything's autonomous. But this doesn't entirely agree with that. I think there is a point where it'll be good enough at avoiding the human factor, or at least giving enough space, or perhaps assigning weights in the path planning around the attitudes of other drivers and such. I don't know, there's a lot that can be done here to increase the safety margin and sort of back the system off when it does predict a high probability of there being erratic behavior in a human driver or something. I don't know, I think that's definitely a solvable concern in a relatively small portion compared to things like obstacles here, which is maybe not the best representation of it. If we look at just 11.3.6, obstacles drops down quite a bit because this also includes potholes, major dips, construction. And when 11.3.4 first came out, day one was really bad because it had rained a lot and there were potholes everywhere. So I feel like that's not exactly a fair representation of how it's handling obstacles and such, like construction and dips and potholes, because with California, especially down here when it rains, there's just potholes everywhere. I'm tempted to put that in a system limitations category, but because this is something that can lead to damage of the vehicle, it's a bit more critical. So the obstacle category does lie under a critical disengagement scenario, but not safety, because with safety related disengagements, I'm looking at whether or not it can do damage to others or harm to others or their property. And with that nod to safety on 11.3.6, if you notice something here, I do not have any safety related disengagements. This actually speaks to a recent tweet video with James Dama expressing that he hadn't had a safety critical disengagement in well over a week. That is pretty common. Safety critical disengagements are getting to be fewer and fewer. It's more so I don't really want to say less important stuff, but less consequential disengagements. But I hope you guys really enjoy the new Causation Donut and the amount of information that's here and the way to look at it and compare with others. Next, I want to get into something really fun. This is something I've wanted to do for a while, and I did mention it in my recent interview with Emmett Peppers. Here is the map. So this is awesome. I've been working with Elias for the last 2 or 3 weeks to put all of our data in here, or sorry, all of my driving data, and for him to correlate it to the regions where I drive to show you guys basically a heat map of difficulty by region. And right now, this is the total region. I'll try to zoom in a little bit here so you can kind of see. I guess that's the best to show everywhere where I've driven here. And sorry if I'm a little frantic with the mouse. I'm really excited to show you all this. And hopefully this RoboTaxi report is a level above the others and more fun and informative to look at. This is my first time presenting with all of this, so I will get more refined and organized and controlled about how I do present it. So all this information that you are seeing here is off of 11.3.6. It's where we've actually started incorporating the regional data. With that, we don't really have anything from 11.3.4 and prior to, but that's okay because we're on 11.3.6 now. Well, 11.4.1 for those that have gotten it. And going forward, we'll be able to actually compare these regions between future builds and show how it's doing in different areas. And this is where it's exciting because I've mentioned before that there are certain regions that'll likely be able to get access to a RoboTaxi feature before others. There are several regions in here where you do have 100% success rate, but it's important to remember that that is with maybe one trip. What I find more exciting is when you get to areas that have more than one trip and still over a 70% success rate, like the Mission Hills and University Heights area. This is a really busy spot, you know, just north of downtown, very popular on the weekends and such. And we've done 4 trips through here on 11.3.6 at a 75% success rate. And when we're hovering over, you can actually see there's only been 1 disengagement in this region since using 11.3.6. Contrast that, if we look at San Diego Airport and downtown, it's a different story. Down here, we've experienced 9 disengagements in this area and about a 20% success rate with trips. And that should be pretty intuitive given how busy downtown San Diego can be, the delivery trucks, the people, the streets, the construction, the congestion, and the need to basically fight other human drivers to make lane changes to actually successfully get to the airport. And given the nature of downtown, if you miss a turn because of the way these streets are laid out with one-ways, you're going through a mess of a scenario to correct yourself and get back on point, and risk looking totally incompetent as a transportation service. Now, I should have brought this up when we were first looking at the map, but at the bottom left, you'll notice a sort of legend showing the breakdown of difficulty based on percentages, and we've decided for now to put it at 67% and above because that's been the highest overall measured percentage of success on RoboTaxi trips with 11.3.6 before it sort of started to balance out. Now in the future, we'll be able to modify these color gradients to better reflect how it's performing, showing when the system is up to, you know, 80+% versus it being 67 to 100. But for now, looking at it overall, there are actually a lot of regions doing really well, north of 67%. Several of these, if you can see right here, El Cajon's at 100%. Kearney and Serra Mesa are at 100%. La Jolla, Mission Trails, Rancho Santa Fe, Santee. Now, keep in mind, you can see right here the number of trips in those regions are lower, but it's showing that there are a lot of areas that do really, really, really well. I'm getting into some more of the problem areas. You can see Mission and Pacific Beach, and even down in Ocean Beach. These regions are both pretty tough because these are also really, really busy spots, tourist spots, places where the military goes to go drinking down Grand and Garnett. I mean, these are the party areas with their own crowds and themes most of the time. But all of these roads leading into Pacific Beach, Mission Beach, going down into Point Loma and Ocean Beach, these are incredibly busy and a lot of weird exits and turns and driving scenarios that are just difficult for humans, let alone the self-driving system. I'll be really excited to see how 11.4 handles a lot of these regions that are red to see if we can bring those up a bit. Now again, as you can see on the map, there are a lot of areas that aren't even colored, and that is because I go wherever Uber or Lyft take me, and most of the trips are in the regions you're seeing. But I can actually drive into other areas and just try to pick up customers there to see how it does. I want to fill in more of this map with a better representation of how the system's performing throughout the totality of San Diego and getting up in the North County and down close to the border in Chula Vista and such. And the more trips I do and the more data I collect, the more this fills in and the more robust the sample gets. Because again, you know, 2 trips at 100% is great, but if the 3rd trip's a failure, that 100% drops heavily. So similar to how the RoboTaxi trip results were initially around 68% for 11.3.6 and then have finally dropped down to around 54, 55, you'll see a lot of these level out too, including these 0% areas where it's a total fail. You know, that is still 1 or 2 trips here and there. All it takes in either of these places is a couple of successful trips and we're up to 50+%. So don't get too dissuaded, but also don't get too excited. We need to remember that the data will help us keep everything realistic and keep us sort of grounded. But it is really cool to be able to show you guys this type of information. I've wanted to do something like this for a while, and it's thanks to, again, Elias for being able to present this in a way that would make sense and show you guys sort of the craziness of being a rideshare driver. Any one of these customers that I'm dropping off in Mission Beach or picking up in Linda Vista could be going to Mira Mesa, Chula Vista, pretty much any point on this map. You can pick 2 points and I can probably drive that route with a customer. It's very random and a great way to see how the system handles the overall chaos of the rideshare platform. Before we move on, there's a cool data point on here too that I didn't really touch on yet, which is the kilometers to disengagement on this side here. Now this is one of those cases where more is better, and you're able to see, you know, a total of 64 kilometers driven in Claremont and 4 trips, 75% success rate. It helps you paint an overall picture of how much driving's actually been done in that region versus how many trips and the overall success. So this is a really fantastic breakdown that is actually correlating to the graph that you're seeing. And this is just the beginning for presenting this sort of information. And after hitting reset here, we get this beautiful culmination of data on this RoboTaxi dashboard. That's a total data-gasm. I mean, when I first saw this, I was going crazy. At the top here, we have my cumulative stats over time from all the journals that I had collected, which at the end of the video, I'll show you guys how ridiculous it was that being so much into tech and FSD, the way that I was recording is so primitive, but it was just the easiest thing I could think of doing at the time because I don't have expertise in programming and creating things like this. So I'm super grateful to Elias and his hard work in making this wonderful dashboard that you're looking at. We're seeing my total distance driven on FSD being over 74,000 kilometers, breaking it down city to highway, looking at the percentages. Now, the trip side on the overall tab is a bit of a spoof. I sort of messed that up when I was describing that. But looking at the right, the RoboTaxi stuff, that's where the trips and success rates and everything makes more sense, and showing the overall operational hours that I did mention when I was chatting with him at Peppers, and my utilization of the system, or the time specifically while FSD is active. Now, to clarify, the 1.2K hours, or the 1200 operational hours, I consider that to be total FSD hours overall, 700 of which specifically City Streets Beta, and the other 500 or so being NOA or Highway FSD, which it is still Highway FSD. Some people make the mistake of thinking that Highway is just autopilot, and that is understandable, except that autopilot is without the ability to navigate, lane changing, carrying you along your route highway to highway. Standard autopilot cannot change lanes. It's basically really good cruise control. So there's the difference. If we're including my time on autopilot before I subscribe to full self-driving, that number jumps up closer to 2,200 hours. But no, I only want to focus on my operational time using FSD, which now it's all under the same software, which is really helpful. But before we wrap up here, there's a couple of things I want to show too. So in the disengagements across the builds, this is where I've been asked to show it in two different ways. And I used to show this through Excel with the bar graphs, but Elias did a really good job of presenting this where I can basically highlight what's going on. So here with the yellow bar, we're looking at patch to patch disengagements to kilometer, or basically the less is better approach. And 10.11.2 over here showing off to the world as being the absolute best. And then we're trending the right direction. Granted, the RoboTaxi results are not quite as high as I'd like in comparison to 10.11. We're going the right direction. The disengagements are coming down. Now, conversely, we can look at this in kilometers of disengagement, or more is better. And as one would expect, these are going to have an inverse correlation to one another. So it's going to be really high for 10.11.2 and then come down toward 10.6.9, which was not the best experience, but starting to go in the direction we want again. Now, looking over to the right, you might be tempted to say that assertive is really kicking butt. This is probably the last thing that I need to iron out on here with Elias. For some reason, it doesn't show assertive correctly when everything's unselected. But if you look specifically at 11.3.6, I haven't used assertive since getting 3.6. I've been doing everything on average and chill to give it its best chance. But I'll try to get some assertive drives in there, or maybe really focus on a more even split when 11.4 hits my car. And then we can see 11.3.4 specifically. And now this does show the amount of time that I've used assertive, especially when I was testing everything out to see if there's any difference. And an average based on this is actually standing out in a really large way. We've also got a breakdown up here on the interventions by category, being, accelerator or turn stock. Turn stock is very, very rare. Maybe the few times where I'm actually trying to prevent it from making an incorrect lane change that might lead to missing a turn and causing a RoboTaxi failure. I consider a turn stock intervention to be a big enough intervention condition to qualify as a disengagement in that sense, or failure, I should say, when it comes to RoboTaxi trips, because if I'm not in that seat to hit the turn stock, it's a moot point. It's as bad as the system failing for other reasons. Accelerator is more common and sort of situationally preferential, if that makes sense, given trying to get us moving a little bit quicker from stop signs thanks to the changes from NHTSA, as well as just moving along if you want to just move a little faster. Accelerator interventions to me are more so dependent on the patience of the user when it comes to FSD. I try to avoid them as much as possible if I can, or I might just keep us gently moving to avoid angering people when we're at four-way stops. Hopefully with future updates, there's less of a lag when it comes to making the stop and then finally getting moving again. Stop signs have always been a little troublesome in that category. And final little point down here in the bottom right, looking at the driving conditions that I've been able to log. Normal being just a typical normal day drive without much traffic or weather conditions, and then everything else kind of specifying whether or not I'm driving at day or nights, or sunrise, sunset, weather, whether or not it's heavy traffic. There's just so many more data points that we can lean into and get a more complete understanding of how the system's performing as we continue to move forward through version 11. I apologize if I've been sort of all over the place with this first RoboTaxi report under this format. Again, I'll get better and more refined. If you've stuck in and you're watching it at this point, you're kind of in for the long haul anyway, and I really appreciate you. At the end of the video, I'll show you all the crazy journals and everything that were happening. But as always, please leave all your feedback, comments, and questions down below. Let me know what you think, and, share the info, spread it around so people can actually see more of the numbers of what's going on with FSD Beta versus the more anecdotal things that you see online, which again isn't to discredit opinions or anecdotal references, but being a science-based individual, this is the way that I like to show things. And with this format, you know, I'm gonna play with it. We might actually be able to make these RoboTaxi reports more common. That being said, my friends, I'm gonna get going so I can actually get this uploaded for y'all and get out there and collect more data before I get 11.4.1 and we can add a whole new software patch to the dashboard. Thanks again for all the views and support, and I will catch y'all in the next video. Take care. All right, my friends, as promised, here is the compilation of ridiculous journals going around. These are all the books that I've kept all of my information in, going all the way back to 10.2, back in October of 21, with my original journal. I knew from the beginning that I wanted to record trips and get all the data I could from everything. Regions, disengagements, all of it. And yeah, this has been my method for a year and a half. So I'm really happy that thanks to the hard work of my buddy Elias, we've been able to get all of this junk into a really nice RoboTaxi dashboard.